Europe in the late 1920s still carried the aftershock of the First World War. Borders had shifted, governments had fractured, and millions of lives had been permanently altered. Institutions that once promised stability remained firmly in place. Churches still governed belief, courts still enforced order. Political authority still claimed legitimacy, though its moral authority no longer felt absolute. The war had revealed how efficiently these systems could organize people. They could command loyalty. They could also destroy on an enormous scale. Silent cinema matured inside that atmosphere. By the end of the decade, filmmakers had learned how to sustain psychological tension through framing, performance, and the length of time a camera stayed with a moment. Historical subjects returned to the screen with new urgency. Some remained rooted in legend, while others became opportunities to examine the human condition under pressure. Into that moment came a film that compressed history instead of enlarging it. The story of Joan of Arc was reduced to a room where questions never stop, and a face forced to carry the weight of the trial. The trial unfolds as an experience that must be endured in real time, long enough for endurance itself to become part of the meaning. Welcome to the Cinematic Century Chronicle, and this is The Passion of Joan of Arc. This video contains spoilers. If you haven't seen the film, I recommend pausing here, watching it, and returning when you're ready. I also apologize for any mispronunciations. Thank you for understanding. The Passion of Joan of Arc is built on an unusually complete historical record. Joan's trial in Rouen was documented by court clerks who recorded the questions put to her and the answers she gave in response. These transcripts survive as working documents. They preserve the language of the courts as it was spoken. The trial did not take place over a single day. Interrogations began in February of 1431 and continued into the spring. Joan was questioned many times on the same subjects. The court returned to those questions repeatedly, changing phrasing and pressing for inconsistency. The movie compresses months of interrogation into a continuous encounter between Joan and the court. The film arranges material drawn from different moments in the trial into a continuous exchange. What the viewer experiences is the court's method, how questions were asked, how answers were challenged, and how pressure was applied over time. The result is a trial that feels uninterrupted. The film holds Joan in that space and does not allow distance or relief. Joan of Arc occupied a renewed place in French public life during the decade leading up to the film. She had been canonized in 1920 and named one of France's patron saints. The First World War had ended only a few years earlier, and national symbols carried heightened emotional weight in a culture still absorbing mass loss and institutional failure. The film emerged from this climate through Société Générale des Films, which invited Carl Theodor Dreyer to direct a production in France. Dreyer was neither French nor Catholic, and he approached the subject without nationalist reverence. What drew him to Joan was the trial itself. By 1928, Dreyer had already built a reputation around severity and moral pressure. He entered filmmaking through journalism and editorial work with a close attention to how language shapes judgment and limits choice. He was an outsider by circumstance as well as temperament. Born out of wedlock, he was raised by adoptive parents in a strict Lutheran household marked by discipline and moral rigidity. Those early conditions informed a lifelong interest in how systems decide who belongs and who does not. Few historical events survive with this level of documentary detail. The surviving trial records offered a way for Dreyer to build a film around language under pressure. These documents did more than recount events. They revealed how authority operates through questioning, repetition, and procedural control. Preparation for the film centered on those records. The transcripts became the film's structural guide. The film's intertitles echo their phrasing closely, preserving the circular logic and rhetorical traps embedded in the court's language. From that foundation came a clear set of decisions. The project focused on method and control. Medieval spectacle held no interest. Heroic framing was set aside. Visual excess had no place in the design. This approach placed the film at odds with expectation from the start. Joan of Arc was a national icon. The film that emerged refused pageantry and refused comfort. Renée Jean Falconetti was known primarily as a stage actress. She had little experience in cinema and no reputation as a silent film star. In 1928, casting her to carry a film built almost entirely from close-ups was a risk. There would be no theatrical distance to hide behind and no montage to shift attention elsewhere. Her face would have to sustain the film on its own. What matters is what that face can hold. Dreyer builds the film around the camera's ability to register thought as it forms. Breath shifts. Hesitation appears and recedes. Resolve tightens, then gives way to fatigue. Falconetti's performance unfolds internally. The film captures the instant a question lands, the pause before an answer forms, and the moment she senses the rules have changed again. This restraint was deliberate. Dreyer discouraged expressive gesture and pushed performances toward stillness. Scenes were repeated to achieve control. Falconetti remains exposed under the camera for long stretches, allowing exhaustion to register without release. This is where the film becomes physically demanding to watch. The close-ups and odd angles serve a clear purpose. Distance disappears. Faces are returned to again and again, the way an interrogator returns to the same question, wearing down the ability to remain detached. By the time the judges and clergymen place the pen in Joan's hand and press her toward confession, the film has already trained the viewer's body to feel worn down alongside her. The cinematography builds fatigue through duration and proximity. Endurance becomes a shared condition. The production constructed a massive, interconnected set representing Rouen prison and trial spaces. Its scale was unusual for a film that would spend so much of its running time in close-up. The set functioned as a complete environment designed to be navigated rather than observed, and it allowed the camera to move freely through the spaces where power was exercised. Designed by Hermann Worm and John Hugo, the architecture draws from medieval sources while bending them into something slightly unstable. The lines curve. Walls rise without offering relief. The space feels shaped to contain and pressure the human body inside it, turning the environment itself into an extension of the trial. These design choices carried practical consequences. Dreyer's camera plan depended on unrestricted movement and aggressive angles. Floors were altered to allow extreme low framing. Walls were adjusted so the lens could intrude without obstruction. The set was built to serve the camera's needs. As a result, the environment never feels neutral. Even when faces dominate the frame, the surrounding space continues to exert pressure, reinforcing the sense that the institution enclosing Joan remains larger and more permanent than the individual resisting it. That pressure extends into the film's photographic style. The visual severity of The Passion of Joan of Arc is tied closely to late 1920s technology. Panchromatic film stock allowed skin tones to register with a clarity earlier stocks could not sustain. This technical shift aligned with Dreyer's refusal to soften faces or shield them from scrutiny. Makeup was reduced to the bare minimum, and lighting was allowed to remain harsh. Faces appear exposed, stripped of cinematic polish, and presented without visual protection. Cinematographer Rudolf Maté plays a central role in shaping this effect. His lighting emphasizes texture and surface, allowing skin to register as something tangible and vulnerable. Pores, sweat, shaved heads, and strained muscles remain visible throughout the film. The face becomes a terrain the camera studies deliberately, with attention and intent. Editing reinforces the same sustained pressure. The film cuts according to breath and response rather than conversational rhythm. Relief is delayed, orientation is withheld. Faces appear suspended against white space. Discomfort becomes part of the film's structure. One of the film's most effective strategies operates quietly within this system. Figures enter the frame abruptly from off-screen, often close to the lens, collapsing what little space remains. The effect registers as an invasion of personal distance. Even without physical violence, the body reacts as if threatened, and the viewer experiences that intrusion alongside Joan. Because the close-up has already compressed the world, these entrances land with force. Low-angle framing reinforces the imbalance of power throughout. Judges and clergy are repeatedly seen from below, their scale expanding as Joan's isolation deepens. The institution asserts itself through size and position. In the final third of the film, the barrage of close-ups loosens in places as the story moves outward toward execution and crowd response, but this visual logic remains intact. Authority retains its shape. The pressure does not dissolve. By the time the confession scene arrives, exhaustion has become the dominant emotional register. The film has conditioned the viewer's body to feel worn down alongside Joan. The release of The Passion of Joan of Arc was uneasy from the beginning. Objections formed quickly in France, where conservative critics questioned a non-French director handling a national saint, and religious authorities raised concerns about how the trial was presented. Cuts were demanded, and the version that reached audiences had been altered against Carl Theodor Dreyer's objections. What the film exposed was not a miracle or a martyrdom, but an institution enforcing authority through procedure. That exposure proved unsettling to the same kinds of structures that had once presided over her trial. That instability followed the film beyond its premiere. Shortly after release, a fire destroyed the original negative. Dreyer assembled another version from alternate material, but without a stable negative and amid continued censorship, the film remained vulnerable to loss and alteration. Over the following decades, it circulated in compromised forms, shaped by re-editing and presentation choices beyond the director's control. For much of the 20th century, the passion of Joan of Arc existed in fragments. Its reputation continued to grow, while the film itself remained difficult to encounter in a complete and consistent form. In 1981, a near-complete print was discovered in Norway. Preserved almost by accident, its restoration restored the film's structure and pacing. The images regained their severity. The rhythm of the trial became legible again. Audiences could finally experience the film as a continuous work. Because the film is silent, its later life has also been shaped by sound. Early screenings relied on live accompaniment, and later revivals introduced new scores that accompanied the images in different ways. One modern composition, Richard Einhorn's Voices of Light, became closely associated with repertory screenings and is often performed live. Other presentations favor minimal accompaniment that leaves the images largely unadorned. Across loss, rediscovery, and reinterpretation, The Passion of Joan of Arc has endured as a film that resists ease and demands attention. Its survival has been uneven, but its force has remained intact. Several of the film's key contributors reached defining turning points through The Passion of Joan of Arc. Cinematographer Rudolf Maté went on to an extensive international career. After working across Europe, he transitioned to Hollywood, where he became a respected studio cinematographer and later directed films of his own. His work on Joan of Arc established the severity and precision that would follow him through decades of commercial filmmaking. Editor Marguerite Bourget continued working steadily in French cinema, building a long career shaped by technical discipline and narrative control. Her editing on Joan of Arc remains one of the clearest demonstrations of how rhythm and restraint can generate sustained pressure without spectacle. For Renée Jean Falconetti, the film stands apart. She returned primarily to the stage after its release, and her screen career never expanded beyond this role. Details of her later life remain incomplete, and she died in Buenos Aires in 1946. What survives with certainty is the performance itself, which has remained inseparable from the film's reputation and influence. Carl Theodor Dreyer continued directing for decades, but The Passion of Joan of Arc remained a central reference point in his work. It clarified his enduring interests, faith under pressure, individuals confronted by institutional authority, and the moral weight carried by systems that claim legitimacy over belief. Later films would return to these concerns in different forms, but rarely with the same concentration. Nearly a century after its release, The Passion of Joan of Arc remains one of cinema's most demanding experiences. It strips historical drama down to faces, time, and controlled space, asking the viewer to remain present with pressure as it accumulates. The film endures because it refuses ease. Procedure becomes visible as force. Authority reveals itself through language and repetition. Fatigue becomes a pathway into understanding rather than an obstacle to it. Next time on Cinematic Century Chronicle, we'll move to 1929 and examine Pavement Butterfly, a German-led European production made during Anna May Wong's time working abroad, when Hollywood's limitations pushed her to seek opportunities elsewhere. Subscribe and join me as we continue to chronicle 100 years of film, one story at a time. Until next time, have a great rest of your day.